Welcome to Cochranton, and we're going to talk a little bit about Cochranton many years ago. So this is Scrapbook Memories. So first off, something that I came up with a little while ago, which history matters. It really does. As you can see, it's a lesson in appreciation. All that we have exists because someone went before us and did the hard work. They provided the energy, the funding, and the belief. It teaches us by example. It inspires courage and tolerance. It encourages our sense of humor sometimes. It gives us a sense of what we've been through in times past and defines who we are. The value of history is in how it guides us in discovering the enduring legacy of our past ideals. There's no secret to making history come alive. The author Stephen Ambrose stated the most important part of history is the last 5 letters, S-T-O-R-Y. It returns as we tell stories and share our legacy with the new generation. This is how family history was passed down from generation to generation. You often hear, boy, I wish Grandma was here to tell us what that was about. She would know. Faded memories recall a time before us, and we discuss those individuals that led the way. It's a time for us to start sharing some of those great stories. Just for these two guys are probably, telling what went on last week. They're right across from where the old red and white store is. They're standing in the middle of the street. Look at the street; it's all dirt. I called this Scrapbook Memories because many of you, depending on your age, are aware of everybody generations before kept a scrapbook. If it was important, you clipped it out, pasted it into the scrapbook. Maybe it was something from your elementary education. Maybe it was a vacation. A lot of the information I've been able to get came from these scrapbooks. When people are cleaning out somebody's estate, these are usually the things that are left that I don't want to throw that out, but I really don't want it. So it ends up in my lap sometimes. And there's some interesting things that happen there, and this is where some of the stories that we're going to talk about tonight, this is where they came from. So those of you that have scrapbooks, don't throw them out. They're more important than what you think. Let's start with where we're at tonight, the Iris Theater. This is the opening of the Iris Theater. The crowd's getting their tickets. This is the fireman's band. They're in the street providing the entertainment. Okay? And the photographer is up on top of the W.L. Dunn building, shooting his angle down through. And Lawrence Helsel, which is right here, will be the MC for the evening, and he was the principal at the high school. As you can see on the street, it says Gallant Best. That was the movie. And so let's explore a little bit. May the 12th, 1947. Of course, built by Covey Dunn. He named it after his wife, Iris. It's seat 400. Now, we're in the same area. There was seating for 456 people. And the crying room was in the back corner where you came in. And it was a little soundproof room that you could bring your youngsters and still watch the movie, but we couldn't hear what was going on in the cry room. Yellow brick, that was kind of that theme of what was going on with a lot of the buildings at that time. Over on the other side was a little Coke and a candy bar. And of course, you know where we're at. And all the attendees got a rose as you left. Mrs. Dunn gave you a white rose. And I told you Gallant Best. Musical selections and look at the admission, 44 cents and 17 cents for children. Now we're going to move up the street a little bit. We're going to go to Alliance Park. We're going to be there where the Cochranton Milling Company is. And you can see it's October the 3rd, it's 1931. Huge, huge blaze. Now this is a report that came out of one of the scrapbooks. A state policeman is coming from Harrisburg going towards Erie. And he sees a glow in the sky. And as he keeps coming closer and closer and closer, he ends up in Cochranton, and it's the mill fire. The mill was 3 stories high. It took about 24 hours to burn it completely to the ground, and it did burn it completely to the ground. There was hardly anything left of it. It was full of grain that had been brought in. As you can see, the capacity was over 20,000 bushels. The firefighting equipment we had at that time was 2 hand-drawn hose carts with probably about 300 or 400 foot of hose, which was a waste of time. They basically watched it burn to the ground. Meeple did send volunteers down, but it was way too late. The key thing here is, again, you can see the fire the way it provided, but the key thing here is there was a groundswell in the community, and this is why we have the volunteer fire department today, because of this place. What happened? We formed it within 6 months, and in June the 7th, it was actually chartered in 1932. The mill is probably the first commercial property in Borough. 1809, John Adams Street, he's one of the owners of the 2 land grants, builds a grist mill. He actually starts out with a sawmill and then later becomes a grist mill. And he puts a carding mill in later and some other things. He sells it, and within a period of time he sold it, is again burnt down. Now at that time it was powered by water. If you walk our trail up there and you go up to the upper corner where the little bend is, imagine that there's a flow of water coming down through there, because that's where the race was. And it would come underneath where the Lions building is today, go back out along behind where the gymnasium or the gym is over there in the corner, and dump back into Sugar Creek on the opposite side of the street. After it was remilled, it was resold a couple of times. This kind of an important time during the Civil War, when Hugh Smith and Andrew Apple will buy it, and becomes Smith and Apple. They're the ones that are going to build it and make it larger and larger and larger. They also owned the mill out at Smith Mills at that time too, so they owned both mills in town. This was the biggest industry that we had. As you can see, it goes through different partners as people age out, and it finally gets to Klinger and Company. Now, Dr. Davenspec was one of our doctors, and he was the money behind it. Jerry Klinger actually ran it, and then later this firm would take on. They'll reorganize it into the Cochranton building thing, and then during Mr. Bushaw's time is when it will burn down. Across the street from us was where Cyrus Miller's carriage shop was. Just where, those of you that remember where W.L. Dunn was, basically right there. Okay, so if we'd walk out the doors, we'd be looking at this establishment. Now, most of you, I'm assuming, didn't bring your buggy and horse tonight. You probably bought your car, okay? So they had a fine array of buggies, so if you wanted to come in. Now, they actually built some, and then they also carried a line. They also carried sewing machines, okay? Which was part of their line also. It was organized, you can get an idea how big it was. It was like 60 foot wide, and wagon makers and carriage makers were the automobiles of the day. Of course, so he's listed as a junior partner. Now, if we just go up the block a little bit to the corner, where there's a building there in the corner, that's where the Schaefer House was, and later becomes the Hotel Burgess, whatever. He's the money behind this operation, although Mr. Miller will run it. And you can see the list of things that they had. And they'll enlarge it over time. And by 1891, then he takes it over himself. Now, the interesting thing about the building is downstairs they built carriages, and upstairs was a big open room. In 1905, I had a lady in town 35, 40 years ago that told about that's where every kid in town roller skated. They had a roller skating rink upstairs. It was probably a square thing, and that's also where they had, when we would gather as a group, that was one of the places you could gather together. He sells the business, and then it goes on to a couple others, other people later on. This is what their home looked like, and if you're going up to the cemetery, it's there on the right. The porch is missing now, but the house looks pretty much it is, and that's Mr. Miller and all his family. And here's a close of them. The reason I bring them up is because Carl Miller, the gentleman in the back row, is Orrin Miller, and that's Carl's father. And many of the stories and stuff that I share with you over the years came from Mr. Miller himself. He was quite interested in history and had a great memory. Lived to be just a little shy of 100 years, so he covered quite a long period of time. If you're going to have a successful town, you need money. So money's, just like it is today, you got to have money. And it only makes good sense. Now, the reason these banks came upon was because of this gentleman right here. That's Robert Patton. And we'll see a little bit more of him. I think he's on the next slide. There he is. There's a little bit better picture of him. Robert Patton had a general store, and he had one of the only safes in town. And if you lived in the community, or if you lived out in the country, if you had a little bit of money that you maybe wanted to have for safekeeping, and you would bring it into the general store and ask Mr. Patton if you would please put my money in your safe so it'll be safe. So somewhere before 1879, him and probably one of his buddies was, let's count up the money we have in the safe. And they had over $60,000 they were holding for people in the community. So the light bulb comes on, hey, we should have a bank. And so that's what happens. These three gentlemen put in most of the money, although there were other principals in it. On May the 31st, 1877, they opened what's called the Cochranton Savings Bank, and Patton will become the first president. In 1879, they'll construct the building. The building is right where the bank is today. Now, all the slides we're going to talk about, we're not leaving the property. We're going to all be right at the bank with the exception of one move. So they built a nice big building. The assets of the bank at that time arose to $118,000. And then in March, they received their national charter with capital stock goes into 50,000, which is originally they started with 20, now they're up to 50. And then later those assets will be transferred to what we call the First National Bank, which is most people are interested in. Now there was a second bank in town. If you were in the city or you were a borough resident, you probably were at the savings bank. But if you were out in the country and farm, you might be with the cooperative bank. Now this facility was located right where the Cochranton Municipal Building is, the Borough Building is today. On the right side over here where it says Cooperative Store, that was what it was. It was a general store that mainly the farmers would come in and go back and forth with. And then the bank was this little double windows, and that was on that side. You can see it was formed in 1881, and its capital stock was also $20,000. They changed it at the end of the Farmers Cooperative when they had a name change. But the green box at the bottom tells the story. They didn't succeed. And they ended up selling off the stock, and the Cochranton Savings Bank bought it for next to nothing. Matter of fact, some of the materials and stuff that they didn't even bother reclaiming. And the store sat vacant for many, many years. This group of gentlemen, which is a little bit away from the banking, but since we pulled them up, this is the GAR. These are Civil War soldiers. And this is in the 1890s. They're getting ready for Memorial Day, which they call Decoration Day. And they've already been out to the Cochranton Cemetery and decorated the graves of their fallen members out there. And they're getting ready to go up to the Cochranton Cemetery. They'll walk up there and they'll individually decorate all the graves that are up there. And so this is what that gentleman is. You can see they even had a band that went with it as a military band. This one is a building maybe some of you are a little bit more familiar with. This was the original building, which was built in 1950. It replaced that building on the top. Okay, that was the original. And that was torn down, and for a year they moved across the street as they built this building. Now, the key word here is fireproof. There wasn't a stick of wood in that building. It was all made out of stone, metal. So they told you right up front, you're safe. Your money's as safe as, there's no way that building's gonna burn down, because there had been major fires on either side of it throughout the years. This gentleman over here, if you are a Cochranton resident, you might remember the name Allison. Now, Mr. Allison's career was all with the bank. As about a 10 or a 12-year-old, he started as the errand boy at the bank, which meant he showed up at somewhere between 6:30 and 7 o'clock in the morning. He swept the floors, built the fires, ran errands all over town, did whatever the bank needed to have done. He spent better part of probably almost to 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, almost spent 12 hours there. Later, he'll become a teller. Then he'll move up to being the head cashier, which means you're in charge of the bank. And then he'll become president of the bank. And then last, when they incorporate a couple times, he's the chairman of the board. And that's a picture of him when they dedicated the inside of this bank. This is what the inside looked like with all the wrought iron and everything on the interior of it. It's the same building if you go up there today, but the facade doesn't look the same. They decorated the outside, and of course they changed the inside many, many years ago, and it's, of course, no longer a bank. Smith Music Hall. Biggest building in the corner. We're up on the northeast corner. We're over where, I guess, Lynn's Bakery is now. You got the idea? We're in that property corner. Huge, huge building. The biggest building in Cochranton. Had 2 hardware stores at one time. There was a hardware store on the bottom floor on both sides. There were offices in the upper side. And there's an auditorium and a stage in the back of it. So a little bit about it. The first property on there was the Thorne, was what Wilson Thorne bought the corner, and you see he paid $1,500 for it. It'll trade several times, but he'll build what's called the Thorne Hotel, and later it becomes the Saunders House after David Saunders was. Now, the only thing we know about it, it was painted yellow, and it had Saunders House in big black letters along the Franklin Street side, and it was a 2-story. And so when Mrs. Smith will buy it, it's becoming run down. They've used it for several other things. It's no longer a hotel, and they've used it for other commercial things. And she's going to buy it, and she's going to level it. And when she demolishes it, she's going to build the building we just looked at. And here's the dimensions. It's 56 by 125, and all the things we talked about. We'll show you some of that. Later, if you're in my age bracket, you're going to remember the Work. They called it the Work Building, but it wasn't. It was actually called Smith Music Hall. And the Works will buy it in 1919, and then their son will take over, and then they will sell it to several other owners, and then William Shorts will come in, and that's where his hardware store will be. And then Shorts will end up selling it. The building is demolished to put in a gasoline station. By the time they put the gasoline station in that corner, there was a gasoline station on all 4 corners. Here's what the interior, well, this is a little bit about the exterior. The different hardware stores. Here's Behringer's. Behringer's also had a telephone company, and it was located upstairs, but that's all the crew from Behringer's there, and you can see when they lasted. WC Work comes in 1919, and this is there. And this is what Shorts's looked like when I was a youngster. That's what the building looked like at that time. Interior. Upstairs is where the first basketball games in the community were played. This is the girls. They played up there along with the boys, starting in, the girls' first year was 1916, the guys were 1913. On the end was a stage. This will be on the upper end towards where the post office is. Small stage, and you can see all kinds of different things going on there. Public meetings. The school would have their, not their graduation exercises, but end of the year type things would be on that second floor. You had to go up a real narrow hallway to get to it, and there was a small balcony on the upper end of it that looked over into it. When the basketball games went on, which as you can see the basket there, the court was really small. And you can see they've got the lights, they've got wire cages on the lights so that we can't break the lights with an air shock. Now we're going to show you something, if you can get it to come up. We're going to show you how they tore it down. This is home movie that we were able to rescue a number of years ago. You can kind of get an idea it was a Keebert construction company that came down and tore it down. And while this building was being torn down, and I know this because I was one of the kids on the street watching it be torn down, we spent the whole day there watching them tear it down. They start to get it to fall down, whatever. Can you imagine, how long it took to build it? Look, it's going to take them a while to tear it all down. And this is a portion of the building that was beside it that was already leveled before this was started. And that's what the Borough building looked like at that time, the front of the Borough building. Now you're going to start to open up the inside. You'll see the big trusses on the upper wall. And here comes some of the stages. You'll be able to see in through into the stage if you kind of look back through in there. There go the big trusses. Now remember, this was built in the 1890s. There's the stage wall on the end. And there it goes. There was a big fire escape on the outside of it that went. then they hauled it away. The big attraction here was, before it got through, those were big plate glass windows, and we took bricks and threw them. And you were allowed to do it, they didn't yell at you. And this was 1968. Just peeling back the years. Gives you the idea of the technology for construction at the time, too. I think if I remember, this lasted about 2 or 3 days by the time they finally got it all tore down and hauled away, and then they had to kind of refill the lot and start to do everything else to get ready for the gas station. Okay, we don't want to see the dog. There we go. All right. We should be back to the Jefferson House when you get there. There we go. Now, another hotel in town was the Jefferson House. This is the main intersection, okay? We're looking down Adams Street. This is the intersection over on the other side, which is where the Surefine store is there. This was the Jefferson House. The Jefferson House was 2.5 stories, built during the Civil War. Had a long porch on the front, which now it is a commercial, even in this vision, is a commercial thing. This is the other side where the other gas station is, 101. This is what they call the Boston Building, and it was also mercantile. And this is looking down towards the elementary school, down towards that way. Jefferson House later became, in the 1890s, became Hugh Moore's store. And they took what would have been the rooms, the individual rooms, which would have been the rooms they let, and each one of them had a product line in it. So one night would have men's clothes, and one other would have draperies and curtains and hangings. And you would go around and go through the different rooms, just like you were going to an expo to get everything. When you walked into the main intersection, or the main entrance, I should say, was a big open floor area, and they had mercantile things and also in that, and you would go up the stairways to the upstairs to get whatever. There was also a full basement in it. At Christmas, the big thing in the basement was they would put model trains and stuff for the kids, and of course all the toys down there. And as you can see, their product line was quite extensive. And as their family aged out, Hugh Moore was in business for just a little shy of 50 years, and then his son took over, and then as things started to change in the way business was done at that time, they ended up closing the store, and within a short period of time, the Sinclair Gas company bought it, and they put a station in there, and that building was also taken down. Just down the street from them, we're going to look at something we don't even think about, the harness shop. You told me you didn't ride your horse in, so you know nothing about harness. There wasn't one harness maker, there were several harness makers in town. But this was probably one of the most prevalent ones. And it was at 125 West, which is just about where, up a little bit from where State Farm dealership is. It's right in that area is where it was located. As you can see, it's a real narrow little building. It's probably only about 18 foot wide, but runs the whole length of the block. And in the back of it was where they did, harness. When you're doing harness, you have to have long tables to lay out, to cut the leather, to sew it, to whatever. And in the back section was kind of the place where everybody had a place to kind of hang out a little bit. So right here is, we're in the back section now, and all these guys have gathered, which is a typical thing. They would come in. Now the Flemings were very active in the community as far as being mayors and members of the council now, but their biggest thing was the funeral industry. And as you can see, they got into the funeral business, and then fathers and sons and whatever, until Ed Fleming, which is maybe some of you be familiar with the name, was one of the last funeral directors in the community before the Dixon family took over. It was in the same place when Ed retired in 1970. The Flemings were also great athletes, especially baseball players. And so you can imagine they're talking about a baseball game, or they're talking about what went on last week or whatever. And these are some of the men in town that are, they're not, you always talk about the women being gossips, but most of the pictures I have all the men in it, so maybe tells you something there a little bit or whatever. So let's talk about a couple other people in town. This is over on Pine Street. It looks a little different than what it is today. That's the big Victorian home that's there. And this is the guy that built it. This is Mr. Cooley. Mr. Cooley was very, very active in the community, and we'll see a little bit about Mr. Cooley here. He started with the Adams and Dean Company, which was a dry goods and groceries, dry goods, textiles, and groceries. Later opens his own store with his brother. Later his brother will sell out to him, and then he'll run it by himself. As you can see, the building was only 22 feet wide, but 120 feet long. And that meant when you went to a store like that years ago, you brought your list in and put it on the counter. And Mr. Cooley and all his associates ran all over the store and gathered everything up and brought it back, put it in a package and wrapped it up, and then you paid him. So you might drop off the list and say, well, we're going to go down the street and do a couple other things. We'll be back in a little while. So this is Mr. Cooley here, and this is his son, Ed. And so this is some of the things that they do. They ran an ad in the newspaper every week, and they would have sales and stuff. It was almost like the blue light specials. This week we're selling whatever. And he sold all kinds of different things. He would go to Chicago, and he would also go to New York and take the train and go out there, and then he would buy things. For instance, you knew the Smiths had a daughter, and she was going to get married here pretty soon, so we make sure that we got materials so we could make her a wedding dress. Or a lot of times people would be out of town, would be interested in a book or something, so he would make sure he would buy the book or something, so he brought it back to service you. So he took very good care of his customers, along with all the other long line of stuff that he had. When he wasn't doing that, he was real busy in the community. The original Borough building, he was on the council at the time it was built. That's a drawing that I made of what the description was. He served as the Burgess, which is the mayor, and he was multiple terms on the school board and also the cemetery board. Now, the community of Cochranton, we have to imagine, when we first started out, we all had a well in the backyard because we needed water. So as the town got to be bigger and bigger, there wasn't room to have wells and wells everywhere, so they needed a central service to service the water system. And when they voted the first time, there's only about 400 or 500 of them living here, but it turned out to be a tie, whether the borough would own the water system or an individual company would own the water system. And Mr. Cooley was in favor of the borough doing it, and so he campaigned, and they voted a year later, and that's what ended up being. So he gets kind of credit for that. As a member of the school board, he was around in 1884 when they built this building, which is the Cochranton Academy. And from that building, the first graduating class of Cochranton High School will graduate, and that was 6 young ladies in 1885. And he had one little problem with it. When they built it out of wood because it was cheaper than building it out of brick. But he was a little bit worried about the problem that it might not last if it wasn't built out of it. So in 1917, he's living across the street, he's ailing, he's in very bad condition, and the night before he actually died, the academy will catch fire in the middle of the night and will burn completely to the ground. So that his family was concerned that this would totally upset him, so they closed the curtains and hoped that he didn't notice what was going on. So in the morning when they went to bring his breakfast up, he greeted them and he said, "School burned down last night, didn't it?" And they had to admit, well, yeah, it did. And he said, remember, who told them that it should be built of brick? And he died later that day. Want to play some football? Let's play some football. This is Robert Curtis, 1882, 1946. This is him right here. This is the Cochranton Football Club. And this is about all I know about him. There wasn't a lot left in him. As you can see, we uniformed, everybody had a different uniform, okay? Now remember, football in this time frame is one of those, we don't forward pass it. Everything is in runs, through the middle runs, the flying wedge, all those kinds of things. It's very violent. This guy has a helmet on. But see what these guys have here? There's several of them. That's a nose guard. They would take this and put this part in their mouth, and this part would go up over your nose, and there would be a thing so that would protect your nose when you went through the line, so you at least didn't break your nose. And it was like you said, there's just hardly enough guys there to have a team. They needed 11. And so there's an extra few guys there. But Bob Curtis is a pretty good player. So he's one of the early pioneering families. His father is one of the first fire chiefs. They own the drugstore in town. So they can afford to send their son to military school. So he goes to Peekskill Military, which is in New York, graduated with honors in 1903, and he played halfback on the football team. But the interesting thing is the coach of the team was Glenn Warner. Everybody ever heard of Pop Warner? Football. Pop Warner has integrated the game of football. He will invent the forward pass, the huddle, the hike. There are about 30 things that he will take credit for. He also will coach a guy named Jim Thorpe when he's at Carlisle, at the Carlisle Indian School. So he gets to play for one of the innovators of the game at the time that he was coaching. So he's one of the first ones in the community to own a car. This is Old Maud. If you had a horse, it had to have a name, so I'm assuming when you had a car, you had to have a name for it too. And we know two things about the car. It was a 1910 two-cylinder Buick. It was red, because that's the only color they made him in. And there was only about 400 of that model made. So it's kind of a rare car at the time. I found a couple other pictures. I think Old Maud's on the front street a couple of times too. And here's Mr. Curtis out for a walk. They're on the railroad trestle, of all places. So he's out with friends for a walk in the community. Those in the farming community, this is what a thrashing machine looked like. This is Sam Marvin's. He was out near Sugar Lake, is where he was located at. And we're going to talk a little bit about farming. So threshing machines they went around. Not everybody had one. So this was his job. When the harvest came, he would bring his equipment, and they would go around and harvest with all the equipment and stuff that they had and that. This is the back of this postcard. This postcard shows they bought themselves a brand new engine, and they're getting ready to take it off the train. This is down by where the railroad depot is, and this is what they have to say about their new threshing, or their new tractor. Now what goes in with that is the thresher's dinner. This happens to be my great-great-grandmother, and she's just served that whole army of people which has come to their farm at Pettis to do the thrashing at. Other activities which you're familiar with sometime is the barn building. This is the Powell barn, which when you're coming into Cochranton, before you get to the Y, look down in there to the right, that's where that barn was. It burnt down in the 1960s. This is at the Ring farm, and they're using the machine again to power something. And here they are. I come back the other day and they were baling hay up there, and they weren't doing it that way. They were doing it and putting it in round barrels. So things changed a little bit in time. Baseball. We're going to talk a little bit about sports. This is a 1908 team. They were a really good team. They only lost one game. And as you can see, there's only 10 of them. They're in front of the photographer's studio, which would be across the street from where the Borough building is, almost in the same location where the doctor's office was before they moved up there. And you can see that's the Cochranton now. Every little community had their own team. Okay, so let's explore a little bit about baseball. First off, ordinance number 20 relating to playing ball and tremendous noise by boys. So we don't want you playing ball. We don't want you playing ball on the street. We don't want you throwing around. We don't want you yelling and screaming and carrying on. This is disgusting. Why would you do that? This was in 1879. But look what the Cochranton Times carries a few years later. Cochranton is getting to be a great baseball town, as can be seen by taking a walk in the evening across French Creek Bridge. Both old and young, great and small, take part in the game they call baseball. So we've made a complete 180 here. We're going the other direction. We're promoting it. Here's a game that's going to be held on the 4th of July, or the 5th of July actually, and it's going to be played over where the fairgrounds used to be, on North Street. So if you go over on North Street, and I don't know exactly where the field was at, but if you kind of go over onto North Street, and I think it was in this back corner where where Sugar Creek comes down around, the players would have looked something like this at that time, not much like the baseball uniforms that we're familiar with. But later on, when things will change, box score from there, and we're going to build a new field. We're going to build a field down by where the fairgrounds is today. Matter of fact, if you kind of know where the school dunking booth is and the band booth is, that's kind of where the corner of this grandstand sat. The grandstand was built in 1903, and baseball had become so popular at that time that on Sunday afternoons, two of the businesses in town would gather up enough guys to have a game, and everybody would show up to watch the game because it was the entertainment of the day. And this field then would be used, and every year they would have to reuse it, and because they would use, the fair would be down there and other activities, so every year there was rebuilding the field. This was one of the fields that when home plate was here, you batted out. There was no fence, so as far as you could hit it and as fast as you could run, you could get a home run. That was the way you got a home run. The field then, over a number of years, would move over to the high school. Styles changed a little bit. In the 1920s, here's our team. Blake Buchanan, he's the manager. Jimmy Sykes was a spitball pitcher, so he put a little bit of whatever on it and made the ball do really funny things. Ed Fleming, we talked about a little bit, he's up there. Mr. Cooley's son, Ed, is in the middle, and he was the catcher. And they were a pretty good team, too, and they would travel around to all the different teams in the 1920s. In the 1930s, this is a high school team. This was the Cochranton team. They weren't the Cardinals yet, they were just the Cochranton baseball team. By the 1940s, following the war, most of the ball teams, there wasn't too much going on during the Second World War, but following the league, because Al Moon, which is the supervising principal, is in the back row, and the guy in the dark shirt, that's Mr. Hubbas, and he's going to go on to play minor league baseball. By the 1960s, they moved over across by where the high school is. They've got a whole new set of uniforms, and a lot of those are high school players, and they're also going to play in the summertime. They built a field over there, which is on the recreation property, and that's where the baseball team plays today. Little League was started just after late 1940s, almost the early 1950s. Joe Mudger, a lot of these gentlemen here will later go on to become members of the 1961 basketball team, which went to the Western Final. Then the American Legion, when they formed in 1946, within a short period of time, they put a baseball team together, and that's one of their players. This happens to be the Little League team that I played on, and we played where McLean Field is today. We were the first team to ever play on that, and this is me in that time frame. Later on, we went to play Babe Ruth, and we ended up with uniforms that all had this on the back of it, which was a little strange. Even it was a little strange when we got them, because the manager had told the uniform company, "What do you want on the back of your uniforms?" And he said, 1 to 18. 1 through 18, not 1 to 18. So some of us took some of the numbers off and made all different kinds of combinations. Also, these were orange. We were the only team that had orange uniforms at Cochranton. We were always prominently red. We had orange uniforms. So let's talk a little bit about basketball. This is the first high school championship team. Yes, that's all of them. Yes, they bought the ball. Yes, they paid rent to play there. Yes, they made their own uniforms. Okay? These little bands are kind of a maroon red. So we'll call them cardinal. So from this first set of uniforms, which is the 1913 team also had the same uniform, that's how we get our colors, red and white. That's through basketball, and that's how we developed that color scheme. This was probably one of the star players at the time. Willard, they call him Beeler, and he graduated with that. He accepted a scholarship to Grove City College in 1921, where he's going to play baseball and basketball. He's really more interested in baseball and basketball, but he'll play for Robert Thorne. You can look in basketball, they won 66 and 16. And he was the league scoring. Now, you had what was called the first team and the second team. So he started out the first year on the second team, and then his last couple of years was on the first team. And he was not only that, he was the captain, and he was also the league scoring champion also. So he was a very good player. But he was also a top performer on the baseball, and they called him No-Hit Fleming. So that can kind of give you an idea. He was a pretty good pitcher. So he'll play for a couple local teams, and Meadville had what was called the Railroad League. Actually, teams would come in on the railroad to play, and the railroad sponsored them. And they were almost like what you call a semi-pro team. Later, he'll go into the minor leagues. He's going to play in the National Double A League from those many years, and these are the teams that he played with. And he's going to go to work for Armco Steel after 35 years. And they moved to Utah, and when he passed away. But that's a picture of him from that. Carl Miller used to tell him that he was such a fast player when he played center field. If the ball was hit way at an angle, he was so fast he could get to the ball and then have a few moments to rest before he reached up and caught it. So, we can believe whatever. Many of you are familiar with Jay Tessmer, our major leaguer. He played for the New York Yankees. This is his baseball card, and let's talk a little bit about him. Class of 1990, he was a salutatorian. He was the male athlete of the year in both baseball and basketball. I was coaching basketball when he played. No scholarships offered. The team wasn't very good. No one came to watch them play, so no one was interested. So when he goes to West Virginia, he attempts to walk onto the baseball team. Cut. So he transfers to the University of Miami. He tries to walk onto the baseball team. Cut. New coach. Maybe. No. Cut. Next year he comes out and walks on again. This is his last shot. So they asked him, this is in the fall, so they asked him to come back for spring ball. It doesn't mean you made the team, but at least you got consideration. So he makes the team, leads the nation, not the team, leads the nation in run earned average at minus .1. And if you know go baseball, that's super great. And earns honorable mention All-American. 1994, he ends up captaining the Miami team. They're third in the nation. He pitches in the World Series. He's a finalist for the NCAA Player of the Year, and he's named to 2 All-American squads. For professional baseball, he's chosen in the 19th round by the New York Yankees, and they assign him to Oneonta, which is a single-A affiliate. Now, that's the same league that Beeler Fleming was playing in. So he's going to play in the A League, and then later on, he's really good in the A League. So they're going to elevate him to the double A. So each time you get another A means you're getting better and better. So he has 30 saves that year and 40. And in the major leagues, he actually gets called up and the game is on TV. And he comes up and he pitches and they actually win that game. So he'll spend 4 seasons in the Yankee organization, and they'll earn 2 World Series rings at that time. And just recently in 2013, he was inducted into the Miami Hall of Fame. We always tell the kids when we talk about them is like, you never quit, because you never know what might happen. You keep going back, you keep going back, you keep going back, and you end up being a major leaguer and of all teams playing for the New York Yankees. We had a local newspaper called the Cochranton Times. This is one of the editors. This is Cooper Bell. Oh. Okay, Bell was the son of John and Lydia Bell. Now the reason we talk about that, because Lydia was an Adams, so that John Adams, remember I told you about the mill, well, that's her father. And so John Bell comes, and he's a cabinet maker, and they get married, and they end up getting 22 acres in North Street, which is where the fair later will be. They own one of the houses down there. And they had 9 children, 2 daughters and 7 boys. And Cooper is one of the sons, along with another. We're going to talk about George in a little bit later. So he purchases the Cochranton Times from R.O. Adele, who starts in the spring of 1880, but Bell really makes it a great newspaper. He reopens the columns, he puts new innovations into it. He's very popular in the community. He's at all the events, he's covering the events, and he's putting it in the newspaper, and people look forward to having him be there. After a number of years, he gets a little bored with it. He wants to go do some other things, and he leaves the paper, and then, of course, he dies in 1911. Did you know the postmistress? She's not the first, she's the second. Post office is one of those businesses that everybody visits almost on a daily basis. So you knew her, to see her almost every day. The post office, let's do a little bit about the post office. Post office was started in 1801, as it says there. The mail came to what was called Sugar Creek, which if you go out to Smith Mills, on the opposite side of where the bed and breakfast is, there was a mill built there, and that's where the mail came. And it was delivered by just a courier on horseback, and then later, as you can see, it goes into the stagecoach. But the first mail, you just wrote Sugar Creek on it, and it got here. And they would hold the mail for you, and the first postmaster is John Greer, and he's going to later become the first Burgess of the community of Cochranton also. And Thomas Cochranton, which is the borough is named after, will later take it over. So they would hold the mail for you, and as you visited the mill, then you would pick up your mail. Now, we talked about Hugh Smith a little while ago. He's going to become, just prior to when he takes it, there's a woman called Elizabeth Smith, and again, a female, and she'll be postmistress for 1 year before it was actually moved. And you should see they moved in October of 1952, or 1852. And at that time, then it is called Cochranton. Now, Cochranton isn't a borough yet. It's not going to be a borough for another 3 years. But it was known that way as a village would be known. So usually what happened when the postmaster changed, wherever his property was, the post office shifted into that building. So when her brother was that, they moved it to the drugstore at that point. Now the drugstore would be located just about where, Sweet Things, or the new ice cream little shop there. It's just about right there is where the post office was. It was a real small little building. It had a bench across the front of it, one door and a couple of big windows, and you stepped inside, and there were several boxes, and then a counter, which is where the mail was taken. The mail went out the back. People would come daily, and they knew when the mail was delivered, because they would pick it up from the train in the morning, and they would pick it up from the train in the evening. So they knew when the train would come, and if they got their newspaper or whatever, they would come and sit on the bench and spend, half an hour, 20 minutes, whatever, talking with their friends, and so that they could visit a little bit before they picked up their mail. And probably at that point, the postmaster would actually be putting the mail in there and say, "Oh, John, your letter's here, come and get it," whatever. So it was a social thing. It went, well, that area will actually catch fire. The rooms above it will catch fire, but the post office will not be damaged, but the post office will move. And when that block is demolished in the W.L. Dunn building, which is the brick building that's there today, and if you look up and then we'll see the marquee, the post office, that became its new home. And that's where the post office was until it moved to its current location in 1968. A little bit about, she'll succeed her brother, like we said, and during her term, these are the rural delivery mail. This is the clerk, and the rest of them are all the guys that would have delivered the mail out in the country. This is like 1901, 1902. And they would each have a route. They were already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, like we always had, and they would come back. She dies on Halloween of all times, and as you can see, it was one of the largest. The community basically shut down for her funeral. They all attended her funeral, and these rural deliveries all became her pallbearers. This is a really bad picture of where it was at. It's tucked into this little part there. There's a little two-wheel cart, and I can't see it up here, I think it's right here. There's a little two-wheel cart, which had been one of the original fire wagons, and they put a box on it, and each day they would go down the alley behind the building to the railroad and pick up the mail and bring it back. That was somebody's job. They did that day in and day out, whatever. So the alley behind that is now called Station Alley, and that's the reason, because it takes you down to the station. We talked a little bit about the academy. This was one of the graduates of that first class. This is Miss Lizzie, Elizabeth Adams, and she's going to come back and be our school teacher. So she's again one of the first families. She's descended of Adams also. Her father was the Justice of the Peace and the Borough Secretary. She graduated that class, like I told you. She went to Edinburgh Normal, which means it's where Edinburgh University is today. And it took her 6 months to get her teaching credentials. So she graduates 1 year, and the next year she's on the faculty. And she's teaching first primary. At that time, first primary was usually first and second grade, sometimes first, second, and third grade, depending on the number of students that was in that. And she would teach for 46 years. She also taught Sunday school, and everyone in town learned the alphabet to read and write by Miss Lizzie. So Miss Lizzie, I don't think they ever called her Elizabeth, it was always Miss Lizzie. She never married, and her and her sister Emma lived 2 doors down from where the funeral home is today. They had the house built. She was a member of the Women's Club, and like I said, school teacher, and this is where she died, and she's buried in the cemetery also. A little bit about the Civil War. The Bucktail Group. This was the recruiting poster that went out in 1862 looking for men to join up. And these are some of the original Bucktails, but we're going to talk about the Cochranton Bucktail Group. Remember I told you about George Bell. Cooper is the editor of the paper. George will be really famous when it comes to this. And this is Sergeant Adams. The reason the flag is here, and this is not, we'll tell you, there's 2 stories that go with the flag. Well, first we're going to start with Mr. Adams over here. This is what he looked like when he went off to the service, and this is him in 1912. When the guys left, and there were 28 of them, they left in a group to go into the service as part of their patriotic duty. The girls in town made them a 4-foot by 6-foot flag to take with them. And it's called the Cochranton flag. And they took it with them to camp, and they had it during all the years that they were in camp. And then as they're starting to get into some of the battles, they're given what's called the national colors, which means the government is giving them. So this flag, when it didn't look like this, we don't know what it looked like. This is what their national colors look like. But the flag is then sent back to put in charge. Mr. Adams will take care of the flag after he comes out of the service. Now, they're all members of Company H. 150th Puckdales, if you were at our reenactment, whatever. A lot of the people from Meadville are members of Company C. We were members of Company H, which are all part of the same regiment. So when we go to Gettysburg, which is their first major engagement, they're on the first day. They're on McPherson's Ridge, and they are one of the first units to take on the enemy. They're outnumbered probably 5 or 6 to 1. They form a line, and they hold. Normally what happens with green troops is the first thing you fire 2 or 3 shots, throw your rifle down, and run like hell. But they didn't do that. They stood, and they took humongous losses in that. Bell at that time is not a captain. He's the first sergeant. He's been breveted, which means he's been given the rank of lieutenant, but he hasn't been given that yet. All the main officers, from the colonels clear down through the captains, are all wounded and are unable to command the troops. He takes over. He puts his men in his line, and they finally decide that they're been repulsing and taking and waltzing all these battle lines, and so the higher ups can see this for me, and they go out there and tell those guys to retreat. So they go out and they say to Bell at that time, "Sergeant, you're supposed to retreat your men." And he says, "No, sir, we will not leave. We are beating them, and we will not leave." And he continues to hold the line until they finally make him leave. They bring him back, and as he retreats his troops back, they hold the line several times, and there's a lot of cannons and stuff at the end. And they actually hold those until they can be repulsed away from, so the Confederates do not capture them. And in the course of that, they will lose this flag. This flag will be captured in the streets of Gettysburg. They started out with almost 400 and some guys, and there's only about 110 of them left by the time they get to the last day. But they will lose their flag. A Confederate soldier captures the flag and says, "Give this to Jefferson Davis with the honor of my family." And when Jefferson Davis is captured at the end of the war, just as the war is ending, this flag is with his personal property. This is now restored, and it's in the museum down in Harrisburg. A couple other, if you weren't a member of Company H, you were maybe a member of Company K. Company K was Abraham Lincoln's bodyguards. They lived with the president for almost a year and a half. Of course, you can recognize Lincoln and Tad. They walked guard duty. The Lincolns personally knew them by name. Lincoln would come down a lot of times and have meals with them. Tad became the third lieutenant. He spent all the time with them. His oldest brother, Willie, had died about 6 months prior to that, so the boys kind of adopted him as a little son. And this is one of the guys. This is Ting Lee. He's the only one I have a picture of. The rest of them, and there were several more, but those are the three that I can verify that were members of Company K. They spent the whole war with them, and in March they were reassigned to Elmira, New York, which is where a prisoner of war camp was. So they were not guarding the president when he was assassinated in April. Now, this is what happened on the night this was the play that he went to attend. And this was the main actress. This is Laura Keene. Now, one of the members of Company H, which is Francis Nelson, had been wounded. And a lot of times after you are wounded, when you go back in the service, they put you in another duty. And if you're badly wounded, which we're going to show you another picture of a soldier, you end up being what's called in the civilian corps, or the Veterans Corps, which this does odds and ends of things. So somebody being at the right place at the right time. He is assigned guard duty after the assassination. He's sent to the theater that evening. And who is he to guard? Her. Wherever she goes, he goes. Because she's suspected at this point of being part of the Lincoln assassination. So when she would go to do anything, he would follow her around. So while he's there, he's also picking up souvenirs. He gets fringe from the flag from the booth where Booth's spur catches the flag as he pulls out of the box. She has a blue, not in this picture, but she has a blue sash around her. There was her and another soldier, and she took it, she cut it in half and gave each one of them half of it. He also had a bill of the night which had Lincoln's blood on it. And he also had everything. So when he came back, he would come and he would tell that story. He would go to the school and he would tell that story and he would show those things. No, I do not know where they are at. I've looked at them for years and I can't find them. But that right place, right time. And these are people from Cochranton, and that was the impact on the war. So after the war is over, we decide a number of years later that we need a memorial to them. And this, of course, is the Cochranton Cemetery you'll recognize. This is Captain Jesse Moore. Moore was in the 111th. He left from Carleton and walked to Erie to enlist. And he was left on the battlefield several times as being dead. He was unconscious, whatever, and they left him as he was dead. At the battle of, he'll be at the Battle of Gettysburg, but he's going to be at Culp's Hill. He's going to be on the back side, but he doesn't get wounded. At Peachtree, he goes to raise his arm and he's shot through the elbow, and he'll end up losing his arm clear to the shoulder. When he goes back into the Veteran Corps, he becomes a captain, and he's assigned 2 companies. So he's a somebody when it comes to that. So they decide they need something memorial to their, so he ends up getting this cannon. That's a 32-pound cannonball that it fires. This cannon was located in the park, which is where we do our Memorial Day services. Originally, it was put on the round circle. The circle, when you come in, wasn't elevated. It was just on the ground. It got moved when the Moore and the Powell families decided to develop those, and it was placed in the park, and that was in 1928. Anybody know what happened to it? Well, I do. In 1942, there was a war called WW2, and they went around on scrap drives and they gathered up stuff like this so they could melt it down and make bullets and armaments for the Second World War. So this was dedicated or given back to the government, and it was made ammunition out of it. So that's where our cannon ended up leaving. So, but it would have been located just ahead of this little thing down in the park. There's a shadow there, and you can't see where it was at. So that was World War. We were talking about the Civil War, so let's talk about World War I. This is on the front street. This is the Schaefer House. Remember, we told you the Schaefer House was just on the corner. The building's still there, but the second floor isn't. This became a picture that I got a number of years ago, and for a while we couldn't figure out what it was until we finally found some clippings. So if you're familiar with your history, World War I ended on what? The 11th day, the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. And so that was kind of a big deal. The war was over. So what happened in Cochranton? It's 4:30 in the morning, all the bells in the Cochranton started to ring. Now that would be the church bells, there would be the churches, the school bell, and the fire bell. Now each one of those, if you were a member of those congregations or those things, you were what was called a bell ringer, okay? You were the guy who rang the bell and took care of it. You'd ring the bell for the church, or if there was a fire bell, anybody would go and ring the fire bell. And of course, the school bell was rung in the morning to bring you to school, in the afternoon to send you home from school, and at 8 o'clock in the evening it was a curfew and sent you home. So the telegraph comes in at the railroad depot. The war is over, and they get the constable out, and he gets all the bell ringers. So what you can imagine, at 4 o'clock in the morning, you hear all the bells ringing. What are you going to do? You're going to run out in the street, find out what's happened. Whole town's burning down. What's going on? The war's over. The war's over. Okay, nobody goes to work today. We're going to have all the churches are full. And basically, that was what the article said. All the churches are full. So everybody went to church in the morning to celebrate that, and then they start a parade through town. Throughout the day, they announce that there'll be a parade in the evening, and they decorate that photograph. Just flip back to that photograph again. There we go. So we're going to make our Kaiser. We only got 2 or 3 trucks in town, so we're going to load those all up. And of course, we all recognize Uncle Sam right here. So Uncle Sam's going to take charge of the Kaiser, and they're going to go through town. And what they told us was the guys would be beside with their shotguns and shooting the shotguns straight up in the air, and the pellets would be going out. You can hear them on the steel roofs as they come down. Everybody's hooting and hollering and having a good time to celebrate that. And they organized this in a matter of a few hours. And later in the evening, they finally get to the main intersection right where the red light is today. And it's like you can say, what are we going to do with him? And they're going to burn him. And they build a bonfire and they burn them underneath what would be the red light today. And then there's a great dance that goes on as they celebrate all the war has finished. If you live in Cochranton, you surely know about water. Water everywhere. This is West Adams looking west towards the covered bridge, which would be where the bridge is today. This is March of 1913. And this is across from the corner. This building still exists. It's now on the corner of West Street. This building is gone. There's a parking lot there, and then over here is where the Jeep dealership is. As you can see, it's taken from the same time. This is just some of the damage coming in along. You can see the train with the water, the tracks going. That's the railroad bridge where it is today. This is coming into town. You can see how everything is destroyed. See what it's done to the tracks. This is an interesting picture, as you can see where it comes through. This is the front of the covered bridge. This is where the American Legion is today. This is where the railroad station was eventually. And these two buildings do not exist anymore. This originally was not in this location, but this was the original Catholic church, which was located up on the corner of Pine Street and High Street. And it was brought down and made into a feed mill after the Catholics no longer had services in it. But you can see how it's been destroyed all in through here. You can visualize where that is today and all the ice flows and stuff that we look forward. Again, you can see just the devastation all over town, basically the whole town. This is Walnut Street, clear across. This is looking up the main street, as you can see that. That's the culvert on Lower Pearl Street. This house is still there today. And the house that's there, you see the end of it, that's where the parking lot where the post office is, across from the post office today. You can see the streets. Although those were brick at the time, you can see there's enough mud there to make it look like a mud street. So later on, 46 years later, what happens? It all happens all over again. Here's our high school inundated by water. Here's the front of it. Here's what it looks like today. This is the home show building looking across to the high school. That's the fairgrounds. Now the date is 59 and some of these are 60 because it was over the two years that it actually happened in 2 years. So 1964, how are we going to remedy that? We're going to build a dike along Sugar Creek, which is going to help limit some of that flooding that we have. But again, it devastates most of it. Here's the fairgrounds, a good shot of the fairgrounds. You recognize the music room, and of course, somebody walking across Walnut Street in knee-high water. Let's talk a little bit about the band. We take entertainment for granted. You know, we can turn on the TV, we can turn on the radio, but in the 1890s or so, there wasn't that. So the band was formed in 1879, as it says. They pay something like, they buy several drums and a bunch of cornets. And a cornet is a little bit smaller than what a trumpet is. A trumpet is longer, but cornets were popular at that time. And you can see these are all the bandsmen in their uniforms. We assume they're a dark blue or a black color, and of course this is their manager. So what they would do when they were first formed, several stories that go with that. First, the town is lit by streetlights, which are fired by gas. And so they would go around sometimes in the evenings on certain days, and I play underneath each one of those. They would play several marches, mainly Sousa marches and those kinds of military music, which was popular with the band. And as they would go around, they would a lot of times be given applause, of course, but they also would be applied liquid entertainment, or liquid, they could have a little drink along the way. So by the time they got to the last one, the music even got better, or at least they thought it did. So they would entertain in the community, and anybody would go to watch. Now I showed you the Powell farm when they were building it. Mr. Powell was a quite a well-to-do man, so he had the boys come out for his birthday party. So they got in one of the drays, which would be a wagon, and they all went out, and the newspaper wrote it up that they had a great time, and he fed them. And they all had birthday cake, and they had a good time. So it was a number of years later, and I don't know whether it was his daughter or not, but somebody got married, so they asked the band to come play at the wedding. And they did such a good job that the bride took her bridal bouquet, which was of roses, and she said, please, she said to the best man, please, you spend these to the band, give each one a rose, my thanks for our enduring music, for the starting our life. So they were quite popular. So we'll move ahead a little bit. They're off and on, back and forth in probably the teens and 20s, and then somewhere around that they kind of fade away. So when the fire department starts their band, or starts their company, they decide they need to have a band. So they organize a band. This is their first set of uniforms in 1940. These are light blue slacks. These are orange, okay, with light blue sets, and they wear a coat and tie. That's my dad. So they become the band, but they only use these uniforms for about 3 years, and they're not the right quality. So they go ahead and they get this uniform. These are all maroon, trimmed in white sashes and that. So that will become their uniform. This uniform costs something like $2 and $2.50 or $3 a piece. Those cost almost $6, so you can see the quality is there right away. And so this is a picture of them on their dedication in front of the fire department later on, and this is the parade in Meadville that they participated in. So now they finally fold to the part where they want the high school kids to get involved. So that first set of uniforms doesn't take long for them to not be very nice. So the band mothers, which would be like the band boosters today, organized in 1949, and this is the uniforms that they said. Again, military style, red, gray slacks. Again, they're wearing neckties and that, and this is a picture of them coming up the street, so you can kind of get an idea of what they look like. Moving on to the next generation, it's Jim Reed, and he was director from '55. He came just around the centennial. Uniforms change again, also gray and red, and the majorettes in the front. In 1974, he takes his band to Florida, and they're at Walt Disney World, and here's a picture of town, and this is Debbie L. Dunn, who's watching the picture. It's probably a fair parade from that era, and Mr. Dunn was president of the Fair Association for many years, and many of you will remember, of course, Mr. Reed. I'm going to take you to a funeral that really had some controversy for it. Those of you here know Alice I. Gator? Probably not. Alice I. Gator was an alligator. Dave Stockton and Dick McFarland went on a trip to Florida. This is where the humor part comes in. Went to Florida and they brought back an alligator. Well, alligators don't live in northwestern Pennsylvania, they live in Florida. Mr. McFarland worked at the corner where Shaw's Chevrolet is. There we go. This is where the parking lot is across from here. This is where the Shaw's Chevrolet was, and he worked there. That's probably him in one of those things that's a bad picture. But they brought the alligator home. The alligator lived at the service station. And lo and behold, the alligator died. And so services were held for the alligator. And these are the pallbearers. And this is Ray Anderson here. And he's right here. And he's the grave digger. And Mr. Stockton, of course, was a member of the Fleming family. So they took the hearse. They made their own coffin. And they had complete services. Closed down the town. Had the funeral through the middle of town. All the kids on bicycles, including me, went to watch the funeral. The only snag that came in, they were going to actually bury her in the Cochranton cemetery, but she didn't actually get buried. She got buried across from the cemetery. So it was all written up in the newspaper, and the Meadville Tribune got aware of it, and several people thought it was very disrespectful what those people down there are doing. And a couple of the merchants back here said, you know, if you can't have a little bit of fun with life, then what's life worth? So, alligator funeral. And she's actually on the cemetery roster. We have her burial on the roster. Many of you went to school, maybe few of you probably went to elementary school versus high school here. Of course, this is what the school looked like. This is the library. It's gone now too. That's where the public library was. The front was taken off, and the rest of it you would remember. This was built. The school burnt down in 1917. This was rebuilt to take its place. Now remember, Mr. Cooley, we're building a brick now. All right, we're not messing around with wood anymore. So 9 rooms that look like a big capital U, with rooms upstairs, downstairs, half in the ground and half out, with an open court. 1926, the open court will become a gymnasium auditorium, and then later additions to the back will add extra classrooms to it. You can see the other date says 1968, because the new elementary school, which is what we are using today, was built in 1966 and located on the other end of town. And there were several calls for this to be used as a public building and whatever, and this has never panned out. So this is what happened to it. They tore it down, of course. And if you went to school there, I thought this would be kind of interesting to show you, again, what the demolition looked like at the time. They sold off all the furniture and all the things. These are the classrooms on the second floor. This is where the auditorium gymnasium was, and it didn't take long to reduce the whole thing to rubble. If you go over there to today, that's the lot where, beside where the library is, and there's a little pavilion back in there. It's not quite the green area, but it's almost that, so kind of give you an idea for scale where it was at. So that was the old stuff. I want to take you on a new little tour, and real quick here, and I'll end this up real quick. These are the new storefront museums, which are down at the Cochranton Fairgrounds. As we say, the past lives to be rediscovered by the next generation. So when you walk through the doors of here, we're going to show you what's inside. So inside is a recreation of the bank. When we talked about the Jefferson House, this is the original safe that was in the Jefferson House. These are some of the original post office boxes that were in the post office that we talked about. These are some of the original counters that were out of that brick bank that we talked about. And these are all the binders and the equipment and stuff that went to that. This is where you would have made out your deposit, and from the 1950s bank, one of the lighted pieces that went on that. And there are stories telling about what I have told you tonight on the walls. Moving over to the next place, we have the newspaper. We talked about Mr. Bell and his newspaper. In the green drawers are some of the type that was used by the newspaper, not Mr. Bell's, but later on after the fire was gone. This is a counter out of one of the grocery stores from the community. Those sports teams we were talking about now are on the wall. So this is our little recreation of the newspaper. We talked about the band. Here's the band using uniforms from all through the eras, clear back to those, Mr. Reed's band, all the way up to what the marching band wears today. We talked about sports. Here's your baseball players. Here's some of those uniforms that played in the basketball and the original scoreboard from the old gymnasium. Diplomas from the school, leather sweaters and that. Riding through Morco, we didn't talk too much about industry today, but going through Morco's beautiful doors, we see the H.L. Moore Company and all the product line that they have. We've been able to save a lot of their information in that. We talked about a lot of businesses, and there they all are. One little story that goes with this, it's kind of hard to see all of it, but that's a roasted peanut machine. A roasted peanut machine at one time was on the front street in front of where the specialty group printing is. And it was kind of a local landmark. I told you about picking up the mail, sitting there waiting for the mail. I talked to you about those guys in the back of the harness shop getting together to gossip. Well, this was the main place to go because the peanut machine was located on the street. So when the farmers would come to town, our bank was closed on Wednesday afternoon so they could be open on Saturday morning. So when the farmers would come to town, they could do the banking, and they would say, okay, you go get the groceries and I'm gonna go to the bank and we'll meet at the peanut machine when we're done because we'll find out what's been going on in Cochranton since we've been away. So you could tell whether it was a good crowd or it had been a good time, depending on how big around the peanut shells were. That became available at a sale a number of years ago, and the Bootstein family bought that and got it back, and we got it restored. So you can visit that little piece of history when you chance to visit the museum. We talked a lot about military. We've got a lot of representation of the military. A lot of the uniforms are from veterans from our community. You can go back through, you start with the French and Indian War, and you work your way up to modern days. You can see how the styles of the uniforms have changed, and the stories are on the walls, which tells about some of our heroes, so we can honor our military. Here, again, is the school that we just talked about, both of them actually there, and there's the diplomas. We see a little bit of the cardinal over there in the corner. Of course, the cardinal mascot came to life in the fall of 1940 when the class of 1941 got to choose a mascot because they were doing a fundraiser for their trip to Washington, D.C. And using the red and white colors, Gladys Ott, or Peterman Ott, decided that her favorite red object was the cardinal, and so the cardinal from there on became our mascot. So the cardinal still reigns over her alumni. So this is a little bit about the Cochranton Heritage Society. Now's the sales point, okay? We've just reorganized and we're trying to get people, so there'll be, when you leave tonight, if you would like to join, if you're interested in history and want to get a hands-on approach to it, join us. Because we need people to help man the museum. We need people to help us reconnect with our past so we can bring all this stuff together. If you're just a little bit interested, we'll find a job for you. But anybody that's interested, we're more than glad to have you come down. Of course, we have the railroad depot, which I didn't have any slides of it tonight, but the railroad depot is down there too, which is again one of the oldest buildings in Cochranton. We've been able to keep all that alive. So it's talks like this that give us an opportunity to reconnect to the past. And I've enjoyed visiting with you a little bit, and if you have a question, I'll answer that. If not, we'll hang it up for the evening. So anybody have a question? Can't see it. No questions. You're great. I must have did a good job then. Good night. Have a safe travel home.
Stay home.
He wasn't home yet when I